and welcome to the Hadassah Collective Podcast. I'm your host, Claire Marrinan. The Hadassah Collective is a unique, wellness-centered community created in and inspired by India, the birthplace of holistic health disciplines. The Hadassah Collective Podcast brings together a carefully curated selection of my most trusted and inspiring innovators from every area of the health and wellness space. I invite my guests to freely share their gifts, their wisdom, their journeys, and their diverse points of view, discussing a vast range of topics including shutdown and self-isolation strategies, integrated diet and fitness, yogic science, modern mental health, and holistic lifestyle, all to inspire you with relatable tools to help you consciously customize, support, and expand your life. On this week's episode, I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Pastor Vanessa Hoyes. Vanessa is an incredibly gifted writer and speaker, and with her husband, Pastor Andrew Hoyes, they have planted churches in Australia and now also in Canada. So Vanessa is also a coach for people in leadership. She coaches people in ministry leadership or also in the realm of business as well. But in this episode, we are mainly focusing on Vanessa's very personal journey navigating pregnancy loss. And so Vanessa really has a passion to bring this to the forefront of conversation because it's not talked about enough. And it's really a taboo conversation, which is alarming because it actually is quite a common thing for people to go through. So we really wanted to have a conversation, a very open conversation about it, and how to help people, how they can bring themselves out of this sort of very private pain and shame around this topic and into a place of finding God's peace and being able to just move through this very difficult, challenging space with dignity and grace. So I hope you enjoy this episode and you get a lot out of it. Hi, Vanessa. Welcome to the Hadassah Collective. I'm so happy to have reconnected with you after 10 years and to have you on the podcast. I'm so excited about this powerful and so necessary conversation. Welcome.
So good to be with you. It's actually amazing 10 years. What has happened in the last 10 years?
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you.
So amazing. So amazing. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you are in the world, and what you do?
For sure. So I'm Vanessa. I am been on this journey on the earth for 45 years, and we are now in Quebec, Canada. People might know Montreal more than even the word Quebec. So married 21 years to an amazing hero in my life, and I have 4 daughters here on earth and one called Anastasia Zoe, who we lost during our pregnancy, our 4th pregnancy, actually. So that's my tribe, my family. I'm born and raised Sydney, 30 years, 10 years on the Gold Coast, which is how we connected. Yeah. And then this last decade, so just before I turned 40, we felt like a real calling to leave everything we knew, uproot everything, start again, and pioneer a local church here in Montreal, Quebec. It's steeped in hundreds of years of Catholicism over here in Quebec, in French-speaking Canada, and we just felt there was just more life, more spiritual life to come out of this city. So our whole family moved and started again just before I hit 40 years old. So
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Yes, I definitely see on your Instagram stories all the snow, and I'm like, wow, that is so different from the Gold Coast.
In fact, there's certain months of our year here where the snow's thick and heavy and it's felt long, where my friends know I barely scroll their Instagram on the Gold Coast when it's the peak of summer. Wow. So
for sure. And to give a little bit of a background, Vanessa and I met over 10 years ago on the Gold Coast in Australia. Pastor Vanessa and her amazing husband, Pastor Andrew, started a church on the Gold Coast, and I used to attend that church. And since then, they've gone out on to plant a new church in Montreal, which is just mind-blowing and amazing. And so tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you start on this path? And describe a little bit about your early life and whether that sort of played into your journey so far.
Yeah, I think I was born and raised in a beautiful environment, single parent from about 10 years old. I was 10 when my father left. And so early on that journey, a significant role model lives your life, a male to a female, and so early on, I was wrestling out a lot in the feminine space, even just the daughter abandonment, some of those things. My mum had a really strong faith in Jesus Christ, and positioned us then in a life-giving church environment, but more than that, positioned us in a spiritual family. So I got to see healthy family, not perfect, but healthy family. Families took us under their wings. We'd go away for vacations with families, even I remember just as kind of a single parent family. So that was an incredible taste of spiritual community and family. I then wrestled out my own faith from about, 16, 17 through to just before I hit kind of 21, those formative, years where you are doing that. So really wrestled out core beliefs, identity, even my own gift of femininity on my life. So lots of work was done in those next few years there. Poor relationships, unhealthy relationships, and then really came back into a fairly solid understanding of my identity in Christ Jesus, but more than an identity, this deep love, affection, that wildness that he has for me, and particularly as an emerging woman. So that I run in those spaces. Very big themes around my life is around that feminine strength and that identity. So then to get married, which even to yield in some of those ways and get married as a strong personality, then to not be able to conceive children for quite a while, quite like the next few years was a real battle there. Then to have a child, then to lose a child during pregnancy. So those few themes in my life became really strong. So that traditional pastor kind of world and leadership I love, but I studied counseling, psychotherapy. So I moved a little bit more into those spaces fairly early on.
Yeah.
And find that my own walk with Jesus is just steeped a little bit more in some of those practices where I would make sure that my soul is being attended to, not just my spirit. So that's how I found myself here now, co-leading with my husband, pastoring, but now as a life coach, I decided that I didn't just want to speak into people's spiritual lives, but into their soul realm as well. Yeah. So I moved into this space over here, which has been a huge journey, but I feel like I've come right back into my very core values and core beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's such an interesting thing to point out as well. Like I always like to identify that as well, like in my own life, like, am I nourishing my body? Am I nourishing my soul? And am I nourishing my spirit? Because I think that those sort of things can get confused as well. And I think that this soul space is actually the mind, will, and emotions is really the battleground space, because it's like, we have the spiritual side and that's amazing. But if we don't do the soul work, that can't resonate through into the physical realm. It can't, I don't want to say it can't satisfy. It can satisfy you for a while, and that's fine. But I think really to have that victory is you have to bring that spiritual power into that soul space as well. So, and I think to be able to access that, you have to condition your body to be able to, create an atmosphere for God, to be able to receive in that space. So yeah, amazing work. What are the sorts of things that you feel like you've really wrestled with and that you've had to overcome to be where you are and to be in the space that you are, that you can support other women in their lives? Or I think you also do leadership training for men as well. It's not only women, but what are the things that you've really battled with and had to overcome in your life?
Yes, such a great, it really allowed me to start thinking this through, and I actually flicked through. I moved here with like 20 kilograms each of luggage, right? So we only had 20 kilograms. So one of my essentials was some journals because I'm so about, capturing just some of those key moments in our life, and so I didn't bring them all, but so when I was thinking about today with you and following your journey now, I know sometimes you've got to go back through your past to then really get to that sense in your presence of, okay, yeah, this is the path. Like you've never diverted from it. It's just the different things have taken you. So key moments for sure for me were really, really struggling with my emerging womanhood. It was for so many, I know that will often be a result of things that were done to them when they were young, that if they weren't born female, may or may not have happened to them.
Yeah.
For me, I struggled with that because it wasn't some of those like key indicators of abuse or, things like that. So to then still struggle with some of that comfort of my emerging womanhood, my body, like that feminine kind of space for me, I couldn't understand it. And yes, I had a father leave, and so I was like, okay, I did a bit more into like, well, what would abandonment be for the soul of a young girl? And but those were the key formative moments for me where I realized that it was okay to wrestle this out and ask some big questions of why was I born female? What does it mean to be female? What does strength mean as a female? What does healing mean for me to come into my own when I was just so uncomfortable in my own body? And really that came down to at that point a revelation again, just that the King Jesus was wild for me, wild for me. Song of Songs is where I sat when I was coming into that healing space. If you've never read it,
I have.
You said our listeners and read it in the Passion Translation or just one of those, more narrative, poetic type of spaces. But you're talking about this radical love affair where he is speaking into every part of your body, your breasts, your neck, your live ligaments, like just this stunning kind of language around Song of Songs. So that invited me into a new space of understanding my feminine strength. So key moment there. And then losing our baby, definitely at 20 weeks pregnant. We were number 4 child. We battled to get pregnant and then had Indiana Hope. Then we really quickly had Avalon Jade, and we were saying you knew both those little girls on the Gold Coast. Then we had Eden Cleopatra, and then we were pregnant again, so we were kind of taking it all a bit for granted. But this particular, I'd always got very depressed in my pregnancies, like very dark, very lost, very, I'm not who I really am. It ended up being postnatal depression, but so it was the same chemical that we discovered later was in my body through each of those pregnancies. So very fake it till you make it. No one in my public world would ever have known, but my husband lost me every single pregnancy. So there was no difference in this 4th pregnancy to that dark space that I was in, except it got darker and darker. And there was a few nights where my husband was basically on suicide watch with me, that I wouldn't kill myself. And I didn't know what was going on and what it was. And I went to get a facial one day. Someone had gifted me a facial, and this lady, she was this gorgeous 80-year-old Russian lady. She was doing my face, and she's like, something's not right. Something's not right. There's something wrong in your body. And I'm like, no, I don't do well in pregnancies. She's like, no, something, your skin is telling me there's something not right in the body. So then I went to get an ultrasound. I would have anyway, but I think I just might have moved it forward a little bit. And my husband was getting on a plane to go overseas. And so my dad came with me, and he wasn't really in the picture, but was visiting me in Australia at the time. And my sister came with me as well, and they both came into the ultrasound. And that, as many people who will hear this know, and who might even trigger that moment where they say there's no heartbeat, that was the most shocking, traumatizing moment of my, like, shocking, even though maybe my body knew it, but my soul did not know that yet. And so they said there's no heartbeat at 20 weeks. And they said, because it's so far gone, you're going to need to give birth to this baby. And if you don't do it ASAP, you might lose your life, because it was basically I was hitting some toxic shock. So do an emergency stop for my husband on this flight. He was on a runway in Melbourne, get back over to the Gold Coast. And it was the worst few days of my life. And then giving birth to a baby not alive was the most painful thing I've ever experienced in our life. Telling my other children, going to a hospital, coming home not pregnant, and then lots of things that are not talked about. So just within a week of that, your breast milk comes in, even though you have a baby. So things they don't say then later about that. So yeah, that started I'd already been supporting families that had lost children during pregnancy. So then to experience it ourselves personally, you think you've got all the keys, but you have none of the keys until like that moment. Yeah. So there were two huge formative moments. And then the third would be moving here, the huge, tumultuous, grief-laden decision to move to the other side of the world from everyone you've known and loved. Yeah, my three big key moments in my life that really invited me to think about again.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm so sorry that you went through that. But on the other side of it, I'm so wowed by what you have created out of that, out of those moments. Because just to sort of give a little bit of background to how this podcast interview came about, a dear friend of mine had just suffered a pregnancy loss, and it's nearly, and I just really felt incredibly ill-equipped to support my friend through this, because I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was saying the right thing. I didn't know if I should be attempting to bring her out of this, or sitting in the grief with her, or how to navigate it. And so that's when I reached out to you, because I did remember this time. And and then you have the most incredible resources. I couldn't believe when you sent me. I was just like, I thought you would maybe give me the title of a book to read or to pass on to her. And you have just on your Instagram, you have so many amazing videos about different parts of this and how to navigate this. And I think it's just such important work, because I know so many women who have gone through this, and they've gone on to have healthy pregnancies. Some of them, some have gone through IVF and had amazing pregnancies and births and things like this, but it's such a common thing to happen. I read a statistic when I was preparing for this that I think it's 1 in 4 pregnancies result in a miscarriage. And that is huge. That's so common. And yet I feel that it's something that's really not discussed. It's something that's kept very quiet, and, a very private, personal pain and shame. And I don't know. I don't feel comfortable about that. I feel that there's a lot of people that are in that darkness that don't know how to get out. So thank you for providing these incredible tools out of your own pain, out of your own dark nights of the soul and difficult times. And we'll definitely talk more about your steps and things like that you have. But I want to talk a little bit about the depression during pregnancy, because I think that that's also something that's not touched upon. Again, I think that we are in a time and a space where, again, I know a lot of women who suffer from PMDD or endometriosis. There seems to be this really, like, I'm just going to say it, but it's really an attack on God's creative power, in the earth. I think that that's what is happening. And how that changed you, like during the pregnancy, and was it a hormonal thing, or how, like, what tools did you use to support you in that time?
Yeah, I just want to affirm that understanding. I think anything that can be attacked and killed in seed form in our life, in any way, shape, or form, is those formative times of dreams, of longings, of, you know, babies, of relationships. Anything attacked in its seed form is, and that's what's happening, right? That's what we believe. Like, we fundamentally believe at the beginning of creation that seed was attacked, and particularly in a woman's life, but of course in everyone's life. And so it was ferociously and viciously opposed, and so so our journey had nearly all the layers. So there was nearly 3 years where we couldn't conceive. So about a year of not being able to conceive, you get diagnosed by a doctor as infertile or infertility or whatever, and then you get offered all those kind of options early on. I was more naturally inclined to try just different ways before I was going to jump into something, and even financially, we were a young married couple, so the IVF path just wasn't straight up our option. But about 2.5, nearly 3 years, it would have become the next kind of thing for us. And so that journey alone, that longing, that monthly physical reminder you're not getting what you want when your period comes again, the hope, the cycle, just that alone was huge. And I know I work with so many people, so many couples, that journey is still where they're at, right? And even after loss, as we're talking about pregnancy loss, for so many, they're not got the story where their babies are in their arms, or a really different way of walking that healing process for someone like that, because it's still not what they imagined their life would look like. So that was, I think, some of the seeds of that depression around everything to do with menstruating. I'd already been struggling because, again, I was wrestling out some of that those menstrual cycles, they reflect so much of our feminine, like, we must do so much study too of our feminine potential and strength, but sometimes we also hate it, and it's so painful, and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of lies you've believed, there's a lot of things you've spoken over that area of your life early on that you're actually, so I did a lot of research into lies I'd believed and things I'd spoken over my own cycle when I was like young and in pain, to really just again go, what will I need to undo and process here, and what was I despising early on that maybe now I'm paying not a price for, because everything can still turn around, but you've got to get to those places of acknowledging how much you despised your uterus, the blood, the life flow that was coming from you. And then every month you'd get to that point of going, well, I hate it even more because now it represents I don't have a child. So I think there was a lot of emotional things going on that I do think probably tipped towards chemical as well. And that can kind of happen. So once I got pregnant, we all thought, my boss, who I worked for, people around me were like, you're pregnant, you must be elated. And for whatever reason, I was so sick, and then it was so physical, and then I don't know, honestly, to this day, if it was emotional, chemical, hormonal at first. But fun. Like, I'm like, here I am longing for this, and I feel like this. And so, and I couldn't tell anyone, because everyone who'd been fighting for pregnancy with me was like, you must be so happy. God's blessing you. This is amazing. And I was like, I would like to die right now. I would like to not be here. I would like to kill you. I was so like, and that went on. And so then when I said to the doctor, like, by the time I had to admit and confess to some suicidal tendencies, then everyone was like, oh, that must be because your baby had passed away. And so that really dark space. But then then we had Sahara Justice after we lost Anastasia Zoe. And at that point, I'm like, what is this? And so my doctor, I wish I could recall the word and I should be more responsible to remember it, but basically he said postnatal depressive symptoms can happen with a certain chemical in your body because, Claire, the second I had my baby, I was a different person. The second I birthed my baby. So it was like the opposite. As soon as that baby was out of my body and new chemicals were being released into my body, lightness to my life came back, like life came back to me. So it was so quick. Andrew would say he would come to the hospital, well, he'd be there with the birth. The second that baby was out, he knew he got his life back.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Opposite for me. Keys for me back then were very anchored in the scriptures, like really declarative over those scriptures. And then a few safe people that I was like, I have to tell you, I'm not happy about that I'm pregnant, even though I was, and now I've got teenage girls. So now we have them in some psychotherapy and we're having to deal with what was happening for them in my womb.
Yeah.
Right? And that trauma and that depression that I had in my womb and the cellular level of where that goes to in them. And so it's good. We're doing hard work on that now, but the more you acknowledge it, I think in the time when you can, I was very aware. So I've been able to really work with a psychotherapist with one of my girls on some of this, right? So, but again, the journaling helped that because I pulled out my journals and I had to really start to realize when I was carrying her, what I was really feeling.
Yeah. And I don't think we really realized that, because it is that time in utero is so important and is so foundational as well. And it's almost like I'm getting a picture of, it's almost that time was almost trying to be stolen away from you or distracted from you. So you couldn't give that goodness and that nurturing. And wow, but it's amazing also, like we all have so much ancestral trauma. We all have in utero trauma that we just don't even know about. And I think that that's one of the things that we're moving into. I read some meme a long time ago that our generation is the generation that is now going to stop and sort out all of this ancestral trauma so that we're not passing it on as well, because our grandparents were like post-war, they were trying to build something, our parents were building on top of that, and now it's like we're not the survival generation, we're here to kind of clean up the crap, if you will, I think, and it's not our parents or grandparents' fault either, like they weren't equipped. They didn't know. I mean, my mom is very like Oprah generation. And so she's very much like, let's talk about it. And, so I definitely got that side of things. But I think it's just a process. And I think it's amazing that you're able to do that with your daughters at their age, because I'm always like, why didn't I have these tools when I was a teenager? Like, why didn't I have these things that I could sort out so I didn't need to go through the bad relationships or whatever and come out the other end and go, something needs to change, So I think it's amazing that you're addressing the next generation, like from that really like healing space. So it's incredible. I want to talk a little bit about, it seems though you touched upon it as well. I know you talk about it in your course as well, how I think the husbands are the forgotten heroes in these times, because it is very focused, like when you lose a pregnancy, it's very focused on the mother, obviously, from a physical perspective as well. But how did Andrew navigate that time, and how did he support you? How do you suggest other husbands, support their wives through this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I recognized was actually when we couldn't have children before we lost a child. And for me, it was some scriptures. We talk, particularly when you're teaching people to believe and promises in the scriptures about bearing children. There's some in the Psalms, and it talks about actually the husband at the city gate standing boldly and confidently at their place of business transaction, right? And so was times where I'm realizing what fertility does in both a woman and a man is fertility, it equals in this society success, like it always has and traditionally always has. And so, but people aren't acknowledging, although in like the, maybe behind the scenes, the men are like, oh, your manhood and right? And that could still be very public, less maybe now more than ever, but in the core of their own masculine heart and ego, and I say that ego in the right word, like the right way, in their soul realm, is all this questions of loss and reproductive like strength. And so for Andrew and I, and he wouldn't mind me saying, because I do teach a lot into it, our issue for not getting pregnant, part of it was actually to do with his fertility, not to do with mine. And just the emasculating of that emotionally, and all the focus being on me. Because society focused on me, I had to focus on him. And so I really got to a point of go, how are you? What's going on in you? We talk about decisions he made. I remember he talks to this day, he was so depressed at some point not being able to have children. He went, I don't even know how he did it, because it would have been a car loan when we were young, like volunteering, young marrieds, in our church. And he got this like convertible, 2-seater convertible. And at that point, I knew he'd lost hope. Like I really knew he'd gone 2 seats, probably won't have kids. And the joke is I got pregnant fairly soon afterwards. We lost so much money selling that convertible. But, so because I had acknowledged him and we used it, there were so many humiliating moments of things he had to do for his tests, like how if you want to talk about your sex life when you're trying to get pregnant, it's like it's not intimate, it's so functional, right? And so there was all that. And then so we already had a basis of acknowledging a man, like the manhood of this reproductive stuff, then journey. Then when we lost Anastasia, really, again, I turned fairly quickly my attention towards Andrew because no one was. And so he had a dream. He'd actually had a dream about a little girl in heaven. So he's got some prophetic kind of, sense things in the spirit realm. And so I really lent into that. He really, really wanted to name her Anastasia. And then when we told as soon as she was being born, he wanted to name her Anastasia. And then for my eldest, who's a little bit like him, we came home to tell her. She was 5 at the time. She said, no, she needs the name Zoe. And we said, well, okay, she can be Anastasia Zoe. And then we didn't know. We announced it then and had some time of grief afterwards. And someone wrote back and said in an email we sent out to our congregation, do you know Anastasia Zoe means resurrection life in Greek? So, anyway, really powerful for both of them. So we kept engaged, but men are the forgotten mourners, and men are the unacknowledged grievers, absolutely, in both pregnancy loss and anything around reproduction in general. So we make sure that we really attend to the men and the women. We try not to make anything we do just too feminine, just about the woman. And so, and then we let conversations. Now, if I could say a disclaimer, we work with people not just married or who can't have babies or lost babies. We're talking about the amount of men I've worked with who, for example, made decisions early on in their life, maybe to abort a baby, or maybe their partner made the decision because of the posture of, women's rights and all the rest of it. So we've worked for years and years, and you're talking grandfathers and uncles, and we're talking like a man that says, well, my daughter lost a baby, but that was my grandbaby. So like men are everywhere in the picture, right? And they're mourning generational, and they're mourning past, like so many things even from their own past. So they're so equal in this story for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of the things that are around it are just not, they're not geared towards men. No one's telling men how to grieve with this, it's just always be strong, be strong, be strong. And I just think as a society, we've moved past that now. It's not about, the divine masculine is also human and also divine, at the same time. And there is that space for men to be open, to be emotional, to feel things, and to really grieve properly. And I think that, there's so much talk about the divine feminine awakening, but we have to realize that the divine feminine and masculine energies exist within both of us, within all people. And we actually can't have a divine feminine awakening without the container of a really strong divine masculine. And so if we want to have this, divine feminine awakening, which I truly believe is so under attack for centuries on the earth and is continuing to be attacked, even in this conversation that we're having now, we're talking about that attack. But we can't have that unless we have that really strong container of the divine masculine. So we need to support our men in, and the masculine within us as well, to be able to create that space where we can really support each other. So I think that that's really, really amazing work. And, we're talking about some really heavy, deep, stuff today. But what is a highlight moment, or, in a place that you've reached that you just never thought was going to be possible for you? And, what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, our highlights, again, I think the resiliency of my family through a transition, moving, and then pandemic, right? Like, let's just the highlight definitely for me has been, I would use the word resilience, because I think it grows in people and it grows in you. So I've got these teenage girls. So again, this generational, these moments feel like highlights for me. You're contending for a lot of peace in their life and all the rest of it through this. But now, again, from loss, transition, and we were talking earlier before we recorded, like moving here felt as triggering and traumatic and as like heavy in loss as losing a baby did for us. It actually triggered, but that's what grief does, right? Your formative years of grief, they really, and often into like the generations before you, but your first experience of grief is often how you'll then deal with a loss, actually is how you'll deal with lots of different moments when you need to grieve in your life. And so I just think the highlight for me now is genuinely like sitting with the psychotherapist with my teenage daughter, discussing some of these things. I would call it a highlight, no, even though you're fighting for their peace, fighting for their mental health, fighting some battles you never thought you'd be fighting as a parent with them. But a highlight because you're learning so much as you watch this, right? So that's been an incredible step. And then them involved in, say, the journey of supporting people through pregnancy loss. This is for our girls. It's a family thing that we do with our anniversary moments. There's a few key moments in our year. And watching them, again, just mindful of pain, loss, grief, collective and individual, and watching what that's forming in the resilience within them is a highlight of our life right now, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love that you use the word resilience, because, I mean, I think it's something that we've all had to sort of cultivate this year, because there's just been this kind of underlying stress, low-lying stress that we've been feeling for the entire year. And our bodies, our systems are not designed to live like that, to cope like that. And so I think that people's resilience has really shown this year. And it's funny that you talk about it with your daughters, because I always feel that resilience is not something you inherit. It's not a trait that, you inherit from your parents, or it's something that is cultivated through the fire, of life. And so I think that that's something that's really incredible. And I can just see such intimacy as well, like through these times with you and your husband and you and your children, like the family unit. That kind of intimacy also is not, perfection doesn't build intimacy. It's these like really challenging moments and how we navigate them that builds that intimacy. And I can so see that in the way that you're speaking about your family. I think that's just so beautiful. And there must have been some moments of self-doubt. And I mean, I'm sure when you were going through the spaces of dark depression, that you were questioning, I'm meant to be happy having a baby and I'm really not happy. So which is the right way for me to think? And really questioning and doubting yourself. How do you overcome those moments of self-doubt?
I love that you said, I'm meant to. I think we need to notice pretty quickly in our life the moments where meant, ought, should, all that kind of language that is externally, whether someone else or you are placing on you. So they're words that come on you, right?
Yeah.
Shame, doubt. No, shame comes on you, doubt. So there's words that come on you, and as soon as you said, I'm meant to feel, that's where I think we need to pretty quickly, and again, some days I did this well, other days I did not. What you need to do is disrupt a default, right? And that's what you're doing. So words carry such weight and such power. So you're disrupting fairly quickly, and again, just addressing a lie, like you're having to bring to the surface what's a lie and what's truth. So the word I'm meant to feel happy, ultimately, like that's a lie that we've believed for so long, that this should equal this, should equal this, should equal this. And so when I would give myself permission to go, I know this is what I should be feeling, but it's not what I'm feeling. The moment I got honest that I wasn't feeling good, I was, the few people I was able to say, it's actually not what it looks like, because I was a leader and I was like, I was preaching, I was traveling, I was speaking to thousands of people sometimes, and I would get up, I would do my thing, and then and also because I had nausea all the way to the end of my pregnancies and would like maybe 20 times a day be throwing up, I would speak for 45 minutes and I would get down, run to the bathroom, throw up, and then, but with that was just so much emotion as well. And so I'd give my best in public, and that's why my home got my worst, because I just had to have a certain energy. So the people that got to know me were the ones in that season where I had to be like, I'm not okay. Okay, and now I feel guilty because I'm not okay. I wanted this, but I didn't want this. So the intimacy with just a few people became really, really important. And by that fourth pregnancy, I think my problem was everyone was like, oh, like it's like the assumption just grew and grew each time you should be happy. So, and I think I had less close connections in that fourth one. So, I really have been able to identify who did I feel safe enough with to really say what was going on. So,
Wow. Amazing. And, I mean, I talk about this all the time. I'm noticing an interesting connection actually with the nausea and the holding of emotions. Like, do you think your body was just not able to hold that much emotion at that time? Because I mean, I definitely feel like that, like not pregnancy or whatever, but I definitely, if I'm not looking at like what I'm feeling, it shows up in my body. you know, it in some way it shows up in my body. And so I'm wondering if there's a connection between that and all of the emotional turmoil that was going on for you at that time.
It probably was, and we chatted a little bit earlier, but I'm a pretty big advocate of the Enneagram as a tool, just a tool to self-awareness.
Yeah.
And they talk about 3 triads: gut triad, head triad, and heart triad. And so often where you're carrying that conflict will either be, depending on if you're a gut person, like it often is in the gut, the nausea, the digestion, and all the rest of it. And then often for people who are a heart triad, it's very much like in the, you know, kind of heart chest space. And then often for people in the head triad, it's the migraines and the, you know, so that's a very generalized, but as a tool, when we're typing people that way, we're often, before we can even know what type they are, we're saying, where do you carry stress? And often it's an indicator of that. So, and I'm a triad, I'm a 9. Those who will listen and understand Enneagram, I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. So I carry all that in my gut, but it's unprocessed because I don't connect well to my heart. That's what a 9 doesn't do. So
I know. I think we've got so much to learn in this space about, you know, how the soul space affects the physical space. And I think it's a really interesting sort of thing to maneuver. And I think that this is the life journey, is when we reach that resistance, and it's removing, you know, that resistance and letting it go and moving then to the next point of resistance. I think that really is the space. It is our life journey, is constantly evolving, but it's kind of coming back to our original self, the essence of who we really are, you know, and it's just peeling back those layers. And I think that the meant tos, the shoulds, all of those things, we've really taken on a lot from society from a really young age as well, from our family, from our schools, from society as a whole. And it's really sort of peeling back the layers of that and seeing like what's actually mine, and really honoring what's going on with you at the time. Like, I love that was your answer to that question, because for me, I question myself often, and I'm like, I should be feeling like this, but I'm actually feeling like this. And so I question whether I'm, you know, what I'm feeling is right. And so I love that you actually honored that space of like, this is what I'm actually feeling. Like, that's a constant practice for me as well, is just to be like, no, this is what I'm actually feeling. Doesn't matter what's going on or, you know, what we think should be going on. So, so that's really...
I work with my coaching clients. Feelings shouldn't have a judgment attached to them. They should certainly not be our master. For sure that not master us, but they should be a messenger for us. I think what is really going on, and so to not judge a feeling, but let it be what it is. I think is part of not letting a feeling also rule you, is to hold it with such a self-compassion. Richard Rohr, he's
amazing,
an incredible, you know, leader in this space of not living that non-dualistic kind of thinking and behaving and living. And so he talks about holding feelings with just such self-compassion, right? And let it say something to you, but don't let it lead you necessarily. But let it lead you to where you need to go, but don't let it master you. So, I'm still learning. But when I think about the moments of those questions that you asked me, they were when I could be most real with just a few people, for sure.
Yeah, amazing. And so you love the Enneagram and some emotional empowerment practices. Are there any other like wellness modalities and spiritual practices that have supported you in your journey as a pastor? I'm sure there's many.
There is. But say though, more over the last few years, the contemplative practices, and I think probably is out right now, right? Just that pausing. Now, pandemic might have taught us the power of pause, but I am a pastor as well, and I lead and speak to people all around the planet. for some people, pandemic added all this amazing time into their life, and for others, it was like the greatest, deepest loss they've ever had. Like disconnection. We pastored here in a big city, so you're talking about foreign students that couldn't get home, living on their own downtown. We're talking here, Claire, still like 15 months on, curfews, stay-at-home orders, 15 months on.
Yeah.
So I'm dealing with like that kind of like person, that beautiful young adult in an apartment that now today in spring, when you only have so much like sunshine in this part of the world, I've been told in Ontario, just across the border, can't leave your house. Like it's still that long on. So I have found the contemplative practices right now really, really important, not because we have more time, because for others they're busier than ever, their lives are fuller, but they are connecting body, soul, and spirit in ways that I don't know if a lot, like we need anything that connects those three parts of who we are together. So I talk about upstream and downstream contemplative practices. Ones that are easy are the downstream ones for you, just based on your personality type, who you are. And ones that are upstream are just harder by nature for you, but we need them because we've got to learn how to, you know, swim upstream in that current. So often it's a typing of a person, it's hearing a bit more about them, say in coaching or in leading, pastoring, and then we go, okay, well, which practices are actually going to be both easy for you to do and difficult for you to do, and let's make sure there's a combination. So for some personalities, silence and solitude is like, give it to me all day, and for others, right, like celebration is not what they'd be used to as a practice, so we often just curate something according to people. But I know personally those kind of breathing techniques for my body, like I'm a body person, so I've never engaged to the full extent as I have in the last few years in some of the breathing and meditation, and welcoming prayer has been a huge one for me, where you are breathing and then you're welcoming things in your body that you're not, until you notice it, you're not sure where that breath is going to take you, and then releasing those prayers. That's a huge, nearly daily practice for me with both my leading and my coaching as well for people.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so let's talk a little bit more about the known, about your amazing resource for people who have either have suffered pregnancy loss or are, you know, in that very fresh in that process of pregnancy loss. You know, you guide people all the way through a lot of incredible steps. Like, I'm going to give you the floor to just talk about what's contained in that course and what could people expect from that course.
Well, first of all, it's always I would call it an honor to speak into this space for sure, because you come into someone's life at some of their darkest moments, right? Or you come into someone's life to revisit one of those darkest moments. And so the Known program, which I worked on last year, there's a few modules already online, and then I've got the last two lots of sessions just to upload, but I want to do them over time. That came into existence because I do a lot of grief coaching in my life coaching. So one of those things has been grief coaching, based again on what I do with people. And so I took 6 months with a client to walk through a pregnancy loss from 16 years ago. And it was 6 intense months. And she'd gone to a retreat. And what had happened is, to address grief in a retreat over 2 or 3 days can actually sometimes be really quite dangerous, right? So quite intense. And then what do I do afterwards? So she had so many blockages, because in that retreat it just came up too fast, too quick for now we're going to believe it was right, and it led her to where she got to. But it took us 6 months, and sometimes you're talking like silence from one Zoom to the other, just like as she was just, you've got to sit with that and, you know, and move through that. And then you've got your own blockages. So from that, I realized, okay, 3-day grief like is intense if there's nothing afterwards or before, like to get into 6 months was amazing. And she had basically she invested in that. She was going to fly to Australia from the UK. Pandemic happened, so she took money that was going to be where she would have gone to people that were really important to her and used it instead in this grief coaching space. And we just saw so much incredible breakthrough happen. But I thought, okay, there's got to be a combination of balance, which 3 days, 6 months. And so I pretty much put everything from what I've experienced working with people in this space for about 20 years into like a 4 session. But again, you're talking probably like 20 modules in those 4 sessions so that people can take as long as they need to self-pace a journey towards acknowledging. And that's why the word is called known, because I think there is such power in acknowledging what this story of loss looks like in your own life, either it's an individual or a couple, or for some of these men, for example, that are like, I need to reflect later on what that loss was. Families together, small groups together, it can be done individual or together. And I really try and put enough tools in there that they're not left undone in a way that is what I'd call, just in my therapeutic language, dangerous, right, for too long. So
I agree. I think that there is a space you know, where it's like it's amazing to dive into the grief, but you have to have something that is supporting you through it, because it's not like you don't want to stay there, or you shouldn't get lost in that grief. There has to be a sort of support system around that. And what for someone who is listening that has been through this or is going through this, what are some of the steps that they can take right now to sort of, you know, support themselves through this?
It's brilliant. The 4 steps we ask people to journey through, and again, it doesn't just need a course, but if there's grief work that we didn't go with the traditional grief work of those 5 steps, right, of grief. I based a lot of my work off a psychotherapist called William Warden, and he does did a lot of grief work, and he says there's 4 steps. So he says you want to look at your now, so you're acknowledging the reality of the loss, no matter when it was, but now, like your current reality. How is it impacting you? Is it affecting a marriage? Is it stopping you in your singleness from relating in a certain way because it's something you've never, talked about? So it's acknowledging what does this loss look like now? What do you want it to look like now? And where is it even in, like we're talking about, where is the current reality of it? So now, the word now, I use that word, he didn't, but what is life like right now? How long ago? All those things, we talk about that. And then the next word is notice. We talk a lot about all these practices you're so familiar with. How do you notice in your body what's going on, in your spirit what's going on, and in your soul what's going on? So we do a lot of work around noticing things you may never have noticed. So I talked about when I moved from Australia to Montreal, I began to notice this felt like the same type of trauma that losing a baby did, and I had to figure out why. So our life needs to be spent noticing, I think. But like you said, you can't stay in that noticing space because you need it, but you need to come through it. So you're noticing pain, you're noticing lies you're believing, thought processes. And then the third step we take people through is, I call it naming. So you've got to adjust to an environment where the person or in grief in general, the person or the situation or the pregnancy you had or didn't have, what's life like now? So Claire, we're talking, if someone's lost a baby but never had another baby, will they introduce themselves as a mother or a father? So there's so many like things that are unspoken about that we get people to talk about, right? So I have other kids. So when my kids were little, someone would say, how many sisters do you have? How many brothers do you have? They go, we have 2 here on earth and 1 who's dead. And I'd be like, that's how you introduce like the reality of this loss. And so then I started, did you just say in heaven? Like, just like, because people are like, whoa, like it comes so quickly at them, you know.
What do you say to a child that says that? Wow. Yeah. But it's very innocent. I mean, that's really the truth, you know, of that's the no, like not adapting to society yet. That's like just speaking their authentic truth, right? But
they are who connected me to eternity before I had any understanding of it. And God wasn't speaking. He felt silent at the time, or felt silent. And it was my children, right, that helped me just connect the eternal, like the they also in for them. But naming is really important. And also some people are going to want to name their babies. So that's a big part of this. And they're going to say, was it male or female? And we talk through that whole thing in the program about what instinctively you know in your spirit, in your body from this. See, not everyone gets... as traumatic as birthing a baby at 20 weeks was for me, even the size of this baby, not everyone, when they miscarried, they don't get that. And on one level, there was more of a process I could go through than those who just miscarry or don't even know they miscarried, or have ghost pregnancies or ectopic pregnancies, or can't get pregnant. So we name a lot of those situations so that people get comfortable with who are they. And then their babies, sometimes they start to say their baby's name out loud. They start to tell that story of acknowledge their babies to other people. So it's naming's really powerful.
So powerful.
We take a moment to, in a ceremony we do around International Day of Pregnancy and Infancy Loss. People can write their babies' names down. We used to release balloons in our service we'd have on the Gold Coast. Now here in Northern Hemisphere, October's a little cold or something by a lakeside, so we have a candlelight and we do it online, and so it was quite global last year, which was really powerful.
Beautiful.
So they name their babies, and then the last thing we get them to do is say, what is new? So what's new life going to look like? What's your new now going to look like? What's your new normal going to look like? And we need to find a space where they can honor the story, honor the babies, honor the situations in rhythms and schedules throughout a year. So they've got some beautiful rituals and rhythms that work for them or their life or their family. And therefore those rhythms and those rituals start to create real acknowledgement anchors in their life. And so that's what their new normal is going to look like for their future. And acknowledging that there's a new way to life without what you thought you would have is really important as well. So they're the 4 steps, they're the 4 sessions essentially, and you can revisit any of those, because I think sometimes we have to go back to those and name something new, name it again, name it deeper, and then come into a new normal from those places.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love how you equate, or not equate is the wrong word, but you notice it's similar feelings around, you know, losing a child and then moving from the Gold Coast to Quebec. I think that that's really interesting to trace those sort of similar experiences, because I mean, you know, the church on the Gold Coast just alone was really your baby, you know, and so to leave that behind, I think is a huge thing. And I think, so these kind of 4 steps, I would really, really encourage anyone who has gone through this to, you know, process this properly. You know, don't miss this opportunity either to process something deeper within yourselves, even though it's so painful. I think that we do ourselves the most damage when we avoid pain. And I'm speaking as someone who has avoided discomfort and pain my whole life, and it only creates more. And so I'm so glad I reached out to you, because I could not have given this guidance to my friend, and so I just was not equipped for that. But I also can see a real gifting here, even in this process of anyone dealing with any kind of grief, any kind of loss. Obviously the loss of a child is something very, very profound and very different. But it's like, I think looking back over this COVID year, there's been a lot of loss. And speaking back to that time when you got pregnant and you weren't happy, I think a lot of us do this as well, is that there are times when we've maybe lost something, but we cover that by going, or not cover it, but sort of deny it by going, oh, well, there's so many other people suffering in the world, much more than me right now. And then you heap this guilt on top of that loss for feeling guilty that, you should be grateful. And I think that that is such a detrimental thing that we can do. So I would really encourage anyone that has really felt a loss, which I don't think anyone has escaped this year without a loss of something, to really dive in and process those things properly and fully, and glean the gold from these things. I mean, you went through such an amount of pain, obviously deep, deep pain through these losses, but you've turned it into beautiful purpose. And without you going through that pain, you wouldn't be able to assist others in the same way as you can. So there's always some gold if we're willing to sort of go through those difficult feelings and emotions and thoughts and things like that. So incredible, Vanessa. I'm so moved by this whole process. It's amazing.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak into it, and where you take people and the tools you give them. If this can just be another tool for them, then I agree. The collective loss right now across the earth is, I don't think we're going to really process it for a little bit longer. And so I was just discussing with my husband, from the feedback coming even from just my posts on pregnancy loss that end up diving into loss. I said I might redevelop a similar kind of course just for the general loss, like you said.
Yeah.
It's deep, it's collective, and it's deeply personal at the same time. We watched to date, when this is going to be recorded, we watched the Queen, grieve the loss of her husband on her own the other day, and many people were saying, like, watching her alone helped them process that they had to grieve their own losses and not be at funerals and not be visiting people in hospitals, and just that single picture of her, right? Like it actually felt like she was doing the collective grief of, the world right now, because so many people were restricted from grieving the way we know how to grieve through loss. So.
Yeah, even that has been taken away from us in some contexts this year, I think that that's been a huge thing. We know people in the UK who were not able to go and see, their mothers with Alzheimer's or things like this, people with really elderly parents. And it's like those last moments, they were not able to be a part of that. And the kind of guilt that they hold for that is so much, but it's also like, it wasn't their choice, it was, so that loss as well is something that's very, very big, I think, that's happening right now. And I agree with you. I don't think we're really going to really process what we've been through for quite some time, I think. So I think it's just really trying to use this time in the best way that we can to expand ourselves where we're constricted, to expand ourselves and to find newer parts of ourselves, newer parts of, areas that we can grow into that we maybe just wouldn't give ourselves the opportunity to do in a non-COVID year, So, yeah. And so do you have any resources that you would recommend that you think would be useful for our listeners?
I do. I'm a fairly general in my life coaching. So on VanessaHoyes.com, there's right now there's just lots of free downloadables. Again, I'm all about tools, but I'm not about over resourcing people if they're underactivated. So my big thing is always take a resource and do something with it, like activate the tool, rather than I'm going to have more courses that I buy and don't do, and you know, like those kind of things, because it's a bit overwhelming right now. But the second you have one and the time's right to do something with it, I think every resource is incredible. So I have right now a grief and loss scale online that you can download based on just some research done in the space of pregnancy loss. And it's just, it comes out with a number that, again, just acknowledges that you might still be carrying something, even if it's from past or very current. You can do that. When you sit with that information, though, I kind of move people to, okay, like read a few of these blogs, just because I don't want to leave people with that and then there's some blogs online there. And to be honest, it's been really hard to find writers in the space of pregnancy loss. And so I try and blog on it. I've got a whole collection of blogs on it. And then the course I do have on offer for people who want to take a journey is there too. But I've got other downloads, like the welcoming prayer. I've got a whole practice from the grief scale you might do. And in that same document, we go into, well, what would that welcoming practice look like?
Yeah.
And then if things will, because I do want to get people to that point of going from acknowledging what am I feeling and then who do I need to share that with. So you don't need to pay for a course to be able to just do those things. So that's all over on vanessahoyes.com, and my Instagram, definitely why men are the forgotten mourners, what not to say to someone who's just lost a baby. Just some of those practical little tools are there as well for people. But genuinely, your presence when you show up in a space like that, to just sit with someone, whether you understand it or not, is always going to be the most powerful thing someone can do for another.
Yeah, amazing. And you know, this podcast was really focused on the pregnancy loss aspect of your work, but I do want to touch on a little bit about your life coaching for leaders. Like, I think that this, when I saw that you were doing this, I was like, oh, thank God someone is doing this, because I mean, I've grown up in the church, so I've seen time and time again, like amazing people that have just sort of burnt out and have been, you know, in that space or fallen from grace or whatever has gone on. Like we see it all the time happening now, so I think that that's an amazing thing that you are doing as well. It's such a necessary thing for people who are in leadership. And I think even just having this conversation with you, to put it in perspective, as someone who is part of your church, I had no idea that you were going through this. You know, really, I didn't know. I saw you preaching and I saw you, so I really wasn't aware. And I think that that's something really interesting, because leaders do feel like they need to have that, be there for everyone else. Whereas, people in leadership are humans too, and they need that support. So can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like and how that came about even?
Yeah, I think leadership is, I'm what you'd call it, I'm not a natural leader. I grew my leadership, but for sure now I lead in quite a few different spaces. But again, when you lead at any level, like when you're leading an organization, a business, a church, a spiritual leadership role has even greater layers of expectation to it. But we're talking, like, even the last year and a half, the amount of people that want to quit, the amount of people that have suicided, the amount of people in leadership positions that have they can't, it's too much pressure for them, for their soul, right? Do you open? Do you shut as a church? Do you talk about vaccinations? Don't you talk about vaccinations? Racial injustices, what do you acknowledge? What don't you? Who believes what? The polarization right now of ideas and opinions. So a leader is sitting, absorbing all that, because if they do, they're damned. If they don't, they're damned. Excuse me.
Yeah, no, totally.
So for a leader to have a space where they get to talk about those kind of not, oh, I did open my church, I didn't open my church, I did keep my business going, I didn't, I did. It's more like, no, how do you feel about that? And I'm constantly saying to them, what do you feel about that? And then they want to apologize for how angry they are because they shouldn't feel angry, or, like, no, we're going to sit with that feeling. We're going to sit with that emotion. How's your marriage through this? Like, it's kind of just conversations with leaders that if they say this generation wants vulnerability from their leaders 100%, but I'm telling you now, they want vulnerability, but they still find it hard to see weakness.
Yeah.
They want their leaders to be vulnerable, but there's only a certain level, right? So be there.
Yeah.
So that is what I've noticed is, and there's a difference, I think, between telling your personal pain or the principle of that pain, because I've got teenagers, so even how much I disclose right now about my marriage, my life, my journey, it impacts other people. So even when I'm coaching leaders, we're often coaching what to tell, what not to tell, right? Because there's so much personal you might want to share, but you can't go public with someone else's story. So what principle can you pull from this?
Yeah.
It doesn't just sound like theory, because you still need to have some personal, right? So some personal application. So every single day, these are the kind of
conversation
things leaders and navigating and conversations we're having. And so I pastor my own church. That's my calling, my vocation. But my leadership coaching and my life coaching, I get the chance now for people to do with leaders around the world, because their churches have come to realize I need to invest in my leader to have a safe space somewhere so they can be a better leader. So that's been a real honor and privilege to be in that space. And online's afforded that, right? COVID's taught us that we can do these kind of amazing things. Connect with people like you and have true chemistry online. So it's been actually really very energizing for me, that space.
Amazing. I totally I find it a really interesting space, because even myself, I've probably have expected more from, spiritual leaders than maybe I should. I don't acknowledge their humanity. And there's almost and I think I'm more coming to that, realization. And we do demand vulnerability in this generation, but I think that there's such a difference. And I think we see this online all the time. There's such a difference between vulnerability, which comes from strength, and people pouring out their insecurities and saying, I'm being vulnerable. I think that that's like such a different thing. But I think when you are in spiritual leadership, as you said, there's so many other layers to it that it becomes very difficult. And I mean, even growing up in the church, I have often found the structure of Christianity incredibly suffocating, because I don't fit that mold, I don't fit that stereotype. And, I have tried at times, but it was very, it was not a time that I was particularly happy, and so it's like, where do I fit in? And I always felt like there isn't space to be human. Whereas now as an adult, I acknowledge, oh my goodness, like for the leaders who, I mean, you can't stand on a platform and preach something that you don't practice, or you can't live out in your own life. You can't. But then how do you go after the one when the many are watching? Like, it's such a difficult balancing act to be able to be really human, and to as well to be able to set an example. And I just want to acknowledge, like yourself, like your husband, it's not an easy journey. And I can't imagine what people are going through COVID and all of these different societal, very dualistic, polarizing things that are going on in our society. And I think that is something for a spiritual leader to really navigate, because I don't think that that is God's will at all. Like, it's oneness and connectedness is God's will. And so I'm so happy that you're there to support people, and what a brilliant work you're doing in that space as well.
Thank you, and thanks for your acknowledgement. And on behalf of spiritual leaders that have really hurt you and not given you space and room to ask questions and explore the mystery of following Jesus, then like, I apologize on behalf, and in moments I'm sure in my own church, you know, where there hasn't been the space and the room for that. And I think the box has been very boxed, and I'm raising a generation of teenagers now asking big questions, and I'm trying to get space for that. And same for our people, right? It's the journey that we've got to love people through, not the behaviors that we want people to. So, and for listeners that have experienced abuse at the hands of spiritual leaders, or betrayal or pain or heartache or misunderstandings, even just to not be acknowledged for who they are, it is my prayer that you would continue to just pursue Jesus, regardless really of what a human has done to you. He's so human. If we follow him, he was so fully human and fully God. His disciples were so human. They were like, I know. Like, they're so human. Like, I think if we could just sit in the Gospels for a little bit longer, we'd see all the glory of the dust, right? Of the dust of our humanity. We'd see the glory in it. And we'd still see God in it too. So that would be always my encouragement, is find Jesus in the scriptures and then find a safe space to follow him.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've sort of learned through that kind of process also is, like, you know, no one is like not acknowledging that something that someone has done wrong. But I think what I've learned to do when I think I'm disappointed in someone, or someone has let me down, and this is not even just spiritual leaders, but it's also like the amount of disappointment that I have kind of shows where I've held that person, the position I've given that person in my life. And I think that that's also something that's really important for people. We all have to be responsible for our own lives, you know, and stop sending spiritual teachers, pastors, preachers, gurus, or whatever up the mountain to meet God, and actually like scale that terrain ourselves, because otherwise we're constantly looking for God in people, and then we're really disappointed when they show themselves to be human. And I think that has been a super important lesson, you know, in my life for sure. So I think we're kind of off topic, but I think it's a good tangent to be going on, because I think it's really important. We see that in all sorts of spaces, you know, not just in the church, but I mean, you know, Yogi Bhajan and, you know, all of these different, you know, different spiritual spaces. And I think it's a, you know, two-way street in someone, you know, asking, you know, positioning themselves as God in other people's lives, which, by the way, I've actually never experienced from a pastor ever. So any pastors that have been in my life, they've never asked for that. But also, we as human beings are wanting to put that responsibility on someone else. So I think it's just a case of doing that. And I think that we've come a long way, though, as well. Like, I think that there really is much more of a human element and a vulnerability in the way people teach and preach and pastor churches. So I think that that's such a beautiful space to come from.
You posted about it. I just reshared it actually about forgiveness, and I just posted about grief and forgiveness and the connection, because Fred Luskin, he says this, like, grief is not getting something you want. Like, that's when you grieve. You don't get what you want. So it's that want again, right? That I want this from you and I don't get it. So he says, once you acknowledge the pain of not getting what you want, that's not another person's fault. That's like, I didn't get what I wanted, or I didn't get safety, or I didn't get this. Then it's at some point they may have to be held to an account, absolutely, but forgiveness is still our responsibility. So, but if we don't acknowledge what it is we're really forgiving, I think that's where it just becomes shallow forgiveness, you know? So
yeah, very much. And I think forgiveness is also like a two-way thing. It's not just, you know, I think we've really have made forgiveness very shallow in the sense that we see it as something like, oh, well, that person did something wrong to me, and so I'm going to let it go. But it's actually really not that. It's also about what what you're allowing to be attached to yourself. It's actually like letting that go and saying, no, that doesn't align to the truth of who I am. Oh, that person treated me badly. I'm unworthy. It's like, no, I'm not going to take that unworthiness because that's not who God says I am. So I'm going to align to the truth. And so I think that that's like a really important factor of forgiveness as well, for sure. So yeah, I'm glad you reposted as well. And so what's next for you? What are the projects that you're working on?
So I'm going to bring this known course to completion.
Yeah.
Again, it's live and online because I know it's going to take people steps to get there. And again, already had great feedback about that. But session 3, I got a little stuck on the naming. It wasn't naming my baby. It was definitely naming my, like, right now, this new grief I was telling you about. So it was good to get stuck. I'd rather get stuck, like you said, and work. So I'm going to finish that, release that. This leaders course for sure, this leaders coaching, but I think I'll probably write something into a program again, more because I believe in just self-pacing on your journey. And I'm going to move this grief place, definitely. I think that's like, again, I think that's our reality for the next few years across the earth, that once we come out of it into our new normal, we will start to acknowledge what we lost or didn't get the chance to do in this last season. So, and I think that's okay. We're going to have to do that because we're moving in a really great place, I believe, across the earth, but we've got to do the deep work, the hard work right now. So I'm really energized in my coaching space for our local community here. We've been 15 months of not gathering in person. So, and we're going to be a good another fall for us, September of 2021. It will probably be the first time we gather in person. So we're in it for the long term here. We're trying to become permanent residents. My husband's fully immersing himself in French, and we right there in the midst of just really making sure that these 7 years we've been here, we know this is where we want to be. We just now need to secure our future here. So
incredible.
My babies and my
I know. I know. I mean, I said to you off the call, before we started recording, but I'm just like, oh my goodness, when I see your Instagram and I see your babies, and I'm like, wow, they're like properly teenagers. And I knew them when they were like 5. So that means that I'm that much older. Like, it's like such a realization. I'm like, wow.
Look a bit older. You look amazing.
Thank you. Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's so funny, but they are really beautiful girls, and they're just, you guys are doing so well, and I'm so happy to have reconnected with you. It's so lovely. And is there anything else that you have on your heart before we close that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think post pre our podcast, I think you and I were having a great conversation about the misunderstandings of people's spiritual journeys, right?
Yeah.
Understanding some of the more again, just the spaces that you are running in, and yet at the same time, I think sometimes people that have found themselves more in this space of not understanding Christians, I just want to celebrate that there's a way forward for all of us, right? And the word collective is so powerful, but to just continue to pursue that space of what is true in the spirit realm is so crucial to the days we're living in. So well done for the conversations you are having, and as a leader, the misunderstandings you have in all different,
directions.
But just stay courageous, and I think that's what I would encourage everyone. Like, courage is so important in this season, in this space. The more connected we are globally, the more accused we are globally, right?
So, absolutely.
So just stay in that space you feel called to be in, and do it with courage.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me, Vanessa. Always a pleasure.
It was an honor to be with you. Thank you, Claire, for hosting me.
Most welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you got some things to take away from our amazing guests' insight. If you did enjoy this episode, please subscribe and also leave us a review. And for more information on the Hadassah Collective, you can visit our Instagram page at Hadassah Collective. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode at the same time next week. And until then, have a wonderful week.